Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Take that prediction to the bank. Joining me now, Labour MP Tristram Hunt. He was a member of the Shadow Cabinet under Ed Miliband. He is campaigning for Britain to remain in the EU. Welcome back
Morning,
to the
Andrew.
programme. Do you accept, let's look at some of the risks that could be associated with remaining. Start with immigration. Do you accept that as long as we remain in the EU, we have no real control over the numbers coming to our country?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the European Union is not perfect, and it's quite right to have this debate about how we reform Europe in the future. Obviously, when it comes to our borders, as you know and I know, we check who comes in. There remain passport controls. But we have to make sure that we explain to people that if we left Europe, but still wanted to trade with the single market, we would also have to have the free movement of people, just as Norway and Switzerland does. But in the long run, I think there is a really interesting question about the degree of free movement of people across the European Union. But my point is that Britain should be a part of that conversation. We should be involved in that reform and change. And if we're not at the table, then our voice won't be heard.
But the numbers would seem to be beyond our control because that's the price of membership. I mean, over the past 5 years, the number of EU nationals living in the UK has gone up by 700,000. It's now 3.3 million. It's doubled in 10 years. Now, as long as we remain in the EU, it's surely a risk that at least another 700,000 could come in the next 5 years. It could be even more.
Or it could be markedly less. If we go back in time, when the British economy was in a worse position in the mid-1980s, obviously you saw large numbers of people from Britain going abroad to work in the European Union. We're taking a snapshot at the moment. And the point about pooling risk across the European Union, across the single market, is that when your economy is in difficulty, obviously you can take opportunities in other parts of the country. But what we should be doing here in the UK is supporting the reforms to make sure that there aren't benefit attractions to coming to the UK. So I think the Prime Minister's point about that you have to pay in before you take out, the point about fairness is really, really important. And I think people in Britain think that if people are coming here to work, to pay their taxes, to contribute to British society, that's perfectly fine.
Well, you say it's a snapshot, but I want you to look at this chart here. Over the last 5 years, as you can see from about 2012, under 5 years in fact, immigration, these are the absolute numbers, not net. Immigration from the EU has risen dramatically. It's actually risen. It's now essentially nip and tuck with immigration from outside the EU. So my point is, it's not a snapshot, it's a clear trend. The part of immigration over which we have no control is rising the fastest. Isn't that a risk?
But we go right back to 1975. So actually, historically, this is a snapshot. And over time, this could well change. But my point is this, that we can't have a system whereby you turn up in the UK and claim benefits from day one. You have to have a contributory principle. But also, those parts of the country, Boston and Lincolnshire, parts of the southeast, which have experienced very high and marked levels of immigration, and we should be absolutely open and honest about this, that we have seen, as your statistics show, big changes, and those have impacted communities in very difficult ways sometimes. They need the extra resource for schools and hospitals and public services that this brings in.
I understand that, but my argument, or at least the case I'm putting to you this morning, is that is not necessarily a snapshot, or that it will necessarily change. Because let's look at the risks we would face in the years to come. Let me just start. Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, she decided last year that over 1 million Syrian immigrants could go to Germany. Eventually, they could come here if they wished. Why should we be at the risk of unilateral decisions taken by a foreign leader?
But obviously, there are issues about residency rights in Germany or Italy before anyone could come to the UK.
Sure.
We still retain border controls. But
if they become German citizens, they'll be allowed to come here.
I think for voters, this is a balance of risks, isn't it? That on June the 23rd, they have to weigh up what are these coulds and woulds and maybes from what we've heard clearly from the Governor of the Bank of England, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the head of the International Monetary Fund, that there will be a seismic economic shock to the British economy.
Right. I understand that.
Hold on. But what
no,
we
no,
all,
no,
but,
I understand that.
But
And there's
we know
been plenty of coverage of the risks of coming out, and we will do more on that. What I'm looking at are the risks of staying in. So let me give you another one. I've given the Angela Merkel example. It could happen again. Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Turkey, they all want to join the EU. 87 million more people that could then have the right to come and live and work in the United Kingdom. That's a risk.
But my point is that we're already seeing the risk of Brexit. The pound is falling in value. Economic decisions are not being taken
that, but
at the
address
moment.
this. I'm not arguing with you that there are risks to coming out.
Which are happening now,
I
Andrew.
perfectly understand that. I'm looking at the risks if we stay in to see if there are any. So address this issue. That the risk is of another 87 more people with the right to come to Britain.
Okay, but my point is, first of all, that the risks are happening now in terms of Brexit, and the British economy is already beginning to...
The risks are happening with Angela Merkel with a million. What's the answer to the 87 million?
Already beginning to suffer. The extension of Europe has to be managed very carefully. And my point is this, that the broader conversation about the total free movement of peoples across the European Union is something that does need to be addressed. But first of all, we won't have any say over that if we've left the European Union.
If we've left the European Union, they couldn't come in.
And secondly, those countries which trade with Europe, like Norway and Switzerland, also have to accept the free movement of peoples. So there's no free ticket on this. What I want is a strong Great Britain at the negotiating table, making the case for our borders, making the case for security. And when it comes to the free movement of peoples, and you've raised the issue of Syrian refugees, and there are concerns about security in the aftermath of Brussels and Paris, being part of Europe, having the security connections with Europe makes us stronger.
Right, well, let me come back to the risks. There's talk of another Greek financial bailout. There are fears of an Italian banking crisis looming this summer. If the Eurozone plunges into another recession, the numbers coming here could easily hit new records highs.
But we've also seen that we're not part of the euro. Again, because of strong British negotiation
but it doesn't mean they still can't
at the
come
table.
here.
But we're also
they'll come here looking for jobs.
But we're also not on the hook for the Greek bailout.
Well, we were for the last one. We contributed.
Well, not to the same degree as other European members.
Are you saying we wouldn't be on the hook for another Greek bailout?
But because we negotiated a strong exemption from that. This is about Britain having a strong voice at the negotiating table. And you're offering up your own Project Fear this morning.
No, I'm not offering. I'm simply trying to take a methodical look at the risks. And my point to you, the Eurozone is stagnating at the moment. That is why not just Poles or Romanians, but young Spaniards, Italians, Portuguese are pouring into this country now in huge numbers, from 63,000 to 137,000 Spaniards alone in the past couple of years. If the Eurozone was to tilt into another recession, that risks a lot more. It's a risk.
And what should the British answer to that be? It should be to deepen the single market, to make it more effective, to have growth right across Europe.
We have no say over that.
Well, you do if you're at the negotiating table. You do if you've got a strong British voice arguing for economic growth across Europe. And my point this morning, Andrew, is that you're talking about these potential threats in the future. We have a threat now. Businesses in my constituency in Stoke-on-Trent are not making investment decisions. The pound is falling in value. Indecision. 2 years of negotiation if we leave.
Well, why
on
are
June
the Germans
20th.
buying London Stock Exchange?
Hold on. 2 years of indecision if we vote to leave
Well, but there's
on
no
the
indecision
June
from the German Stock
23rd.
Exchange. Why are they buying the British Stock Exchange if there's indecision?
Well, there will always be levels of flow and investment.
That's a massive investment.
But what we're seeing is fear and concern about the future. And I think of workers in Staffordshire who go to work at the Toyota plant in Derby. They have jobs because we're part of the single
you're not going to
market.
filibuster out going on. I'm asking you about the risks.
Yes, and I think they're real economic risks if we leave.
If we remain, I'm asking you about the risks. You seem to be
determined
to talk about
less.
Well,
do
you deny that if we stay in, we face further integration?
Well, what we've had is a clear commitment from the Prime Minister that we are not going to be involved in ever closer union. And that's a really big philosophical moment, that Britain has a distinct and different stance to the rest of the European Union. And I think people will benefit from the best of both worlds, that we don't have that closer integration.
You'll be familiar with the Five Presidents report. It's the official roadmap for greater integration for the European Union. It calls for genuine economic union, financial union, fiscal union, political union by 2025. That could affect us.
But we've got a clear commitment that we will not be involved in ever closer union.
Well,
and
you
that's
say
what,
that.
that's what we're putting to the British
Have you read this
people.
report?
I haven't read all of them.
Well, well, it's not a long report, actually, because the report says this, that much of that, what I've just named, not all, because a lot of it would just be the Eurozone, I perfectly accept that, but much of that could be achieved already through a deepening of the single market, which is important for all 28 EU members. So we would not necessarily be excluded.
No, but there's a difference between the politics and the economics. I am in favour of a deepened single market so that those 200,000 businesses in the UK exporting to Europe have greater growth, have greater opportunities, people become richer, we have more prosperity.
So there could be further integration.
On economic grounds, I'd like to see the digital economy integrated more. I'd like to see the service economy integrated more. We want more jobs and growth through Europe that Britain will benefit from. Why would we, when we face a global fear about downturn, not just Europe, decide to cut ourselves off from the richest single market in the world?
Well,
500 million people.
Well, let me finish
who
with
can buy
this
British
point,
goods.
because it's another risk. You say it's the richest. It's also stagnating. And because we can't do our own trade deals with those parts of the world that is growing, our trade is therefore hindered. It's taken 7 years to reach a deal with Canada. It's not complete. The free trade deal with Australia has been blocked by Italy. The EU has made no progress with India in 9 years. These are all, unlike Europe, growth markets, and we are unable to do free trade deals with them. That's a risk.
Do you honestly think, Andrew, that if we left Europe and there were negotiations with India about a free trade deal, the United Kingdom, 60 million people, would be ahead of the queue of the European Union of 450
Well, nothing's happened
million.
with India
we
for
would
9
be
years.
right at the back of the queue.
Why? We have
are
historic
not,
links with India. What
we
about
are-
Australia and Canada?
Andrew, we're not owed a living in the world.
We're not asking for a living, we're asking for a free trade deal.
We have to make our businesses grow on their own terms. And you do that by being part of the European Union. You have a much greater weight around the world by being part of this massive trading bloc. And my point is that we have the best of both worlds. We do have the historic connections with the Commonwealth, with America.
With whom we can't do free
but
trade
through
deals.
Europe. But why does the American trade representative say to us, you would be crazy to leave
Because
Europe?
that's the State Department line.
Why do all our
Let me put
allies
this-
around the world, our friends around the world,
Let me
say
put this
you
final
should be
point
part
to
of
you.
Europe?
You say we won't be part of any further political integration. You say we won't join the euro. We won't be part of Schengen. And yet it is clear that Europe is going to become, at least within the Eurozone, more and more integrated. We will have less and less influence on that stand. We'll essentially become a sort of semi-detached country club. What's the point?
The point is a growing market for British businesses of 500 million people. And yes, this is the point about the best of both worlds. We don't want ever closer political union. They can integrate further in the politics. We want access to the single market. Best of both worlds, safer, stronger, and better off in Europe.
Tristram Hunt, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it all my